Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Effective IT Asset Management, Pitfalls and Best Practices. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in our event today. You should see a box in the upper right corner of your desktop. This is your control panel. You may submit questions to our presenter today by typing your questions into the question pane on your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time throughout the presentation. We will collect these and address them during our Q&A session at the end. You will also notice on your control panel that there is a handout tab, and on the handout tab, you are able to download today's presentation and be able to have that for your reference after the webinar. Make sure you grab it before you leave the webinar today, so you do have a copy of it. I would like to now introduce you to Edward Pham.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, my time, for a discussion about how to achieve effective IT asset management. In this session, I will go over our perspective of what it is and point out some of the common pitfalls, as well as sharing with you the best practices that RealIT have been using to help our customer achieve their purposes. So we all have been very familiar with the concept of IT asset management, and but actually it is more than just an inventory system. So if you look at the IT asset management life cycle as a whole, you would see that it would involve quite a number of enterprise organizations, departments in there, going from the user request to procurement to people who are receiving the asset, maybe put it into your stockroom, and then go through the deployment process, maintaining it, administrating it, and finally retire when the asset is actually no longer in use. And industry analysts actually did some study, and they found that only 4% of the cost of your IT asset is really related to procurement. The 96% is in operation. So how would we actually be able to maximize the usage of your asset at the same time trying to reduce the operational cost is probably what most organizations is looking for. So in our view, we actually looking at it from a new perspective, because when we realize that there are so many different departments involved in the IT asset management, our look at that is to have an effective IT asset management system. You need to understand that it is the one that would provide correct, complete, and up-to-date information about all of the important IT assets. It's not just IT assets, it's assets that are deemed important to your organization. And these assets are used by the organization as well as workforce. So that is our own view at looking at IT asset management. So the key operating words right there is correct, complete, and up-to-date information. And that is the own operated and used by your organization. So really, it's quite a challenging problem to solve. And when you take a look at this entire enterprise system as an ecosystem, then you would realize that to do an IT asset management effectively, you would have to look at the components that are included in this ecosystem. Our first view is that it is an information system. It involves a lot of technology, and actually all the technology that you have in your organization, there's some aspect that the IT asset management will touch on, and then your operation. And finally, you have to take a look at the vendors involved, and I'll be going into each of these bubbles in subsequent slides. And last and foremost, very important, your user community. So let's take a look at information. What we have is that your asset information is actually having the right information that you need in your system. And that would typically have, the typical asset data such as make, model, serial number, and so on. But more importantly, you need to know who owns the asset. If you want to track the cost, then you have to have financial attributes associated with your asset, including when you purchase, how much you pay for, maybe the PO number, who you're buying it from, and then who uses the asset. Some asset, personal assets such as computer, a laptop, and cell phone and portable devices. Those are easy to track if you in fact know how who uses the asset, and also be able to track the life cycle of the asset throughout the users. Sometimes you loan it out. Sometimes if you loan the asset out, you need to retrieve it somehow. And if you don't have information about who uses it, it's very difficult to achieve that. And then also have information about the vendor, because you may need to reach out for them for support, for warranty purposes, and maybe just for maintenance, and develop additional relationship with your vendors so that you can actually be able to improve the values and the usefulness of the asset used by your organization. It could also include things that are a little bit harder to track, such as software asset or software licenses, and particularly when you take a look at how to count the entitlement, as well as looking at the usage of your software licenses. These are very, very important information to have in the asset management system. And also, in the end, at any point in time in the life cycle of your asset, you would need to also know the current state, whether or not it's in use, or perhaps it's being retired for maybe purposes that are related to specific projects. And if you do that, maybe your asset will be cycled back into the pool and be able to redeploy. If you don't have the right information in the system, it would make it very difficult for you to make decisions like that. Then we take a look at the second bubble in the ecosystem, which is technology. So think of it as, in order to track all of the important assets, you need to reach out to all of the technologies that are being used in your system. This really is quite complex if you think about it, because there are all kinds of systems that we need to tap into. So there's a lot of data integration, system integration, and the asset management system itself is, because of those touch points, it is quite a complex system. So you need to have the proper knowledge in order for you to care, to maintain, and maybe to enhance the functionality of the system going forward. Like I mentioned earlier, it really is requiring the organization to do a lot of integration. You already have many systems that are actually collecting inventory information for you. And now with the introduction of cloud-based solution in place, it will make it a little bit more challenging to get all of this information into your asset system. And finally, because of the business changes and the technological changes of the system we are using, your asset management system must also be able to evolve with the organization business needs as well as technical needs. And in terms of operation, well, like anything else, you deploy it and then you operate it. And particularly, if you refer back to my second slide, the 96% of the cost of your asset management is in operation. So how do you ensure that you actually be able to have your asset management system evolve, that are involved in the orchestration of many data flow among the various parts of your organization? Most failures you would see later on that actually is related to the difficulty in how you are going to be collecting, consolidating, and bridging and all of that information into your asset system. And because of the complexity involved, you do need a very deep knowledge of your ITOM solution in order to get out into your organization, reaping the benefits of your IT asset management system. The user must also be able to use the system effectively, and if you fail to train user, particularly when user are actually changing roles or you have new user coming, without a proper training plan and training capability in place, your user would actually be trained by people leaving the post. And when you have turnover like that, what we found was that the knowledge that actually passed down from one user to the next is actually watered down tremendously. And when this go over a few iterations, then the knowledge that actually passed down to the new user is quite limited. So really training is extremely important, and not only for the user of the system itself, but also for the administrator of your solution. And don't forget that when you buy a software solution, off-the-shelf product application, it is very critical to actually have a great relationship with your vendors, because in the end, they are the one that actually enhancing and evolving the solution over time. The technology evolve, any single particular solution that you purchase will need to also be evolved with them. And I'll go more into that, particularly in a vendor. So in terms of vendors, my view is rather than trying to do a lot of customization yourself, I mean, sometimes you do need to do that, but most of the time you can actually leverage in your relationship with your vendor. And my view of a vendor is that you can look at them as your off-payroll extended software development team, where you can provide feedback and ideas to them to allow them to actually taking the solution forward. Maybe, even the bigger the size of the organization as a customer, the more influence you're going to be able to have with your vendor if you do have a great relationship with them. And most vendors nowadays, they do have a user community. So I would encourage tapping into this user community so that you can actually be able to look for ideas, maybe looking for information that other organizations already implemented using solutions similar to the one that you're using. And finally, I would like for you to look at your vendor is get them to be accountable for what they're actually putting in front of you. And perhaps the best way to do that, I've found, was to request for maybe quarterly meeting where you can discuss issues or maybe good feature to have, so on and so forth, in the effort of actually getting your vendor to support your cause, to enhance the functionality of the solution that they're actually offering you. And finally, the user, well, we need to know, you need to know who the user are. And you refer back to my first slide, there's about 6 or 7 different user community, from the end user request to procurement, maybe people who are running the financial side, because some of that information, asset related information, are stored in your financial system, to the people who are receiving it, docking it, storing in the various stockrooms around your organization. And particularly if you have many sites, many different stockrooms, it's very important that these people understand how to use the system and produce the data that need to also go into the system. I already mentioned about training your user. Now, when you involve your users, you would actually be able to understand quite a bit more in terms of what they really need for their operation. So I can guarantee you that no single solutions out there will actually be able to give you every single attribute of an asset that you need. So some of these attributes would be coming from your end user community because they need to get certain information out of the system. And what happens when you don't have that type of information readily available for discovery, you would have to actually work with them to come up with a data set. And the management of these data set would be done offline, would be done outside of the tool, and then be able to use capability from the tool set to actually be able to import that into your asset system. This is an area that I've found many organizations lacking. I mean, even if we have technology out there to do the scanning, for example, you're looking at SNMP, for example. SNMP has been around for a long time, and the SNMP information, there are 2 particular attributes with the SNMP MID2, the standard MID2. One is location and one is the contact. And I've seen people just putting some very simple information in there. But if you just imagine that you actually agree on having a format standard format for you to actually have a structured data into those two fields, you can then be able to key in some of the what I call the soft asset attribute inside your devices so that the technology can actually be able to scan and parse it out and bring it into your asset system. And I mean, there are so many different technology that allow you to scan for information. So you just have to work a little bit in terms of during your deployment process, how do we create what I call the electronic asset tag that you can deposit into your system, which are typically not available in the typical deployment for your scan technology to pick them up. So what are the key challenges that we've seen in the past dealing? One is that very commonly you have asset data that is really scattered throughout, and I've seen a lot of big organizations still relying on spreadsheets, or maybe they have internal systems with databases or even data warehouse storing certain attributes that are related to your asset. So because of that, it's really making it harder to collect, consolidate, and also to keep up to date. In addition, most organizations deploy engage in the deployment of an IT asset management. They should deploy and go through the phase one and basically get the solution or the functionality running as of the end of phase one. They not look beyond that because of some reason that the organization is not be able to proceed to the next phase. There may also be technology in the environment that are not readily available to share data among themselves. So you do need to have a mechanism to be able to tap into these data sources without having to rely on a lot of custom development inside to do so. So it's very important to actually find a technology, find a vendor that would provide you the solution to tap into a lot of data sources. We're also looking at seeing that there are a lot of lack of internal training, particularly for the system admin of the system, because in the end, when you're looking at a system where there are a lot of connection to other components within your IT infrastructure, that requires quite a bit of knowledge. Sometimes it may be database, sometimes it could be just scripting or SQL. So we need to have, or you need to have a team, perhaps at least one system admin and then a backup, and be ready to train them should you actually have turnover. The other thing I've seen was that most of the time when you deploy the solution, the vendors, the salespeople just fade it out of the way. But don't let that discourage you. Try to reach out. And I mean, if you have a great vendor, then the sales team would stay very, very much in touch, and they'll be able to work through the next phase, work through issues. So make sure that you establish a great relationship with your vendors. And one of the common theme was that we don't have a clearly defined user requirement. So we don't know what type of data we actually present to the end user. So as a result of that, we rely on technology, solely on technology, to give us the information. And I know that there are many data scanning or system scanning technology out there that would give us tremendous amount of data, but to try to get the information out of that data, it does require a little bit of data administration or data analysis. And then finally, business can change very quickly, and IT is failing to keep up the pace. And particularly if you administrators, if the system administrator is actually doing so many things, the time that they can actually be able to spend on advancing or enhancing your IT asset management is extremely thin, and therefore you falling back to just having whatever functionality that was able to roll out in phase one. So before I talk about the deployment or how to actually best implementing it, we have an asset management maturity model whereby most organizations would actually just have ad hoc system, or maybe you have an inventory for hardware and software, and then once you get to the point where you actually be able to collect the software license and usage information into your system. Now, the configuration management, you can debate whether or not it would be higher up in the maturity level. But when we talk about configuration, I'm looking at the linkages among the various configuration items within the organization, not just for asset management perspective, but also for other operation as well as the other ITO processes that you need to deploy in your organization. And finally, at the highest level, you actually have the entire asset lifecycle management, where you track the asset from, I call it cradle to grave. So at the moment the user put in a request all the way to deployment, and then be able to decommission the asset. Okay, so what have you seen, or what have we seen in terms of the asset management solution that are deployed out there? Most of the time, we're seeing that by looking at the ecosystem, we are seeing lack of certain attributes or certain achievement within the ecosystem that we saw. And for the most part, most organizations out there would actually have an IT inventory system with incomplete and outdated data. So you don't have a true IT asset management solution at all. So how do we actually be able to or why did we actually get into that in the first place? The common pitfall that we are seeing is that, first of all, it's a journey. You're deploying an IT asset management solution takes a few steps. And if you don't have management support or the budget to reach a higher level of IT asset management maturity, then you always be able to just go to that particular limit. Some companies are actually very discouraged by the complexity of keeping your data relevant, clean, and up to date. Right? So getting data is easy, but keeping the data clean and up to date and relevant is quite challenging, particularly if there are other soft attributes that you don't have readily available. And then the lack of training and knowledge maintain and enhance the implemented solution, right? So when you deploy it, put the effort in there to enhance it, rather than looking at just missing some functionality and rip and replace it with another solution without first paying attention to the other components of the IT ecosystem. And then finally, lack of clearly defined set of information to get from your solution. You need to define what you want to get out of the system. So for example, if you're in evergreening, so you need to be able to collect information regarding how many devices that are actually falling off because you need to evergreen. If you're looking at contract management for maintenance, if you don't have information related to the maintenance contract for your asset, or maybe you have too many contractors sitting around and that information is in the financial system, then how do you actually be able to get that report out of your asset management system? So the more questions you ask related to how you get what information you want to get out of your IT asset management system, the better it would allow you to equip your system with the right information. Right, so having said that, how do we actually be able to achieve an effective asset management? So in our practice, really there are 4 key areas. One is that you need to create an asset management unit, and then having to define the process, but aim for the short-term, medium-term, and long-term objective. Remember, I mentioned that it is a journey. So you're not going to be able to get to the highest level of maturity in phase 1. So we have to actually plan it out like that. Then you go through your normal selection to pick out a tools and maybe a team to implement it with you. Remember that automating the asset discovery is important because you're dealing with quite a large number of assets in the first place. And in addition to collecting asset information automatically, remember there will be a data set or set of data that are not readily available for discovery at all. So how do you handle that? And that is quite important. Then you need to augment your operational data. By operational data, I mean maybe the support team, maybe the vendor information. Who do you call when this particular asset failed from a vendor support perspective, or internally, who uses the system? All of this is important because it would feed into your operational processes such as the change management, request management, problem incident management, so on and so forth. And then you need to ensure adequate training for user and system. I mean, I just keep repeating that point, but it's very important, and that's why I'm keeping bringing that point. In addition, you have to expand and evolve your processes so that you can try to link it into your configuration management and finally be able to get to the highest level of being able to manage your asset lifecycle from cradle to grave. And then, best of all, also know your limits. Your team may not have the technical knowledge at the start, so reach out to the right team to help your organization with the implementation. Remember, sending people on a training doesn't make them an expert. So you need companies that actually have done this quite a few times to help you out, and maybe retaining them not for day-to-day operation, but also to help you with the maintenance and enhancing of your system. And perhaps they can help you with the maturity of your system to get you to the final goal. Common pitfalls. Oh, that's so. How do you implement this? Right. So I mentioned earlier that there's a way to do this, and in our implementation plan, we're looking at these 7 different areas. One is really for you to know your user, determine the scope of the data is important, be able to analyze the gap in your tool because you may have a few tools in place. Some of them may provide overlapping functionality. So we want to also reduce the technology required for you to acquire the asset information. Once you identify the tools in both, the gap in both the tools and in your data set, then plan to bridge this gap. And then finally create a roadmap. You may need maybe 2 or 3 phases to get you there. Defining the right scope for the initial deployment is also important because this is where you establish your baseline system for you to improve, for you to grow on. From a data perspective, maybe at a minimum, you need to get the organizational information, personnel, and then your devices that would be important to you. Computers, could be hardware, server related as well. And if you have virtual environment, get that. If you happen to also use cloud-based computing, find a way to actually be able to extract the asset that you have in the cloud into your system. Because in the end, you need to have a full view of what IT asset you have in your system. For the data sources, mostly I've seen spreadsheet, I've seen custom developed databases, but there's a wealth of information that you have in your organization already. I'm quite sure that most people have SCCM in there. So whatever technology that you do right now to do your scanning, inventory scanning, we can leverage that. If you don't have that, there's quite a few that are available for you to do so. And maybe you need to tap into the financial data. I know that sometimes finance is really resisting the ability to do that. Okay. And then looking at the reconciliation, we have to be able to pair your data so that you can clean your data and normalize the data set. That is very important. From the usability of the system, we just make sure that it is user-friendly. I want to jump through very quickly because I realize the time is running out for me. So So make sure that the system has is designed or deployed with the usability in mind. Maintainability, if you're trying to make the system too complex to maintain, you're going to be facing failure. So whatever customization that you have to do, you have to make sure that it's not going to cause supportability in the future. Expanding your system, remember, take one step at a time, and then when you finish that, take the next step, so that you will actually be able to grow the functionality over time. So the question is, having said all of that, is effective ITAM achievable? And there are many solutions out there. Since we are a Micro Focus solution, and in channel partner, we do know that they have a few solutions in place to help organization achieving this. One is Asset Manager, or the next version. So Micro Focus is actually putting in an evolution of this application. And by doing this would allow us to actually be able to have, for example, the software asset management, contract management, and asset tracking right off the bat. And in terms of the solution, it depends on also the components underneath the two areas at the bottom of the screen there is considered to be a configuration management system, whereby we leverage the universal discovery to actually get the data in. Most people are actually looking at, well, when we deploy an asset management like that, we do need to have a data model. So some company actually start to engage people to develop that model. Well, you don't have to do that, particularly with the Micro Focus CMS, because they have perfected this model for a long time. This particular application has been in circulation for more than 10 years, and they have all out-of-the-box model that we can tap into right away. And as you can see, we can handle business application, license, configuration item, cost center, so on and so forth. So there's a wealth of out-of-the-box capability that we can leverage to get the data into your system. This CMS will also be used by your asset management solution in order to achieve your requirement. So really, the CMS functionality would allow us to use, for example, to really top up your asset object. And if you need additional attribute, the system allows you to create these attributes right from the user interface. You can add more model, you can add more relationship if required. And in the end, you know, in order for you to actually be able to get to the IT or the effectiveness of your ITAM, you do need to take a look at the reality check and ask yourself some simple question. However, for our webinar, I extend our invitation to provide your organization with one free initial assessment of your ITAM maturity level and recommendation for the next step. So should you decide to leverage this offer, please either contact me or go to our website and send information to request a meeting with us, and then we can take you from there. So in summary, asset management has become an increasingly important aspect for organizations of all sizes. If you have the right information in your asset management system, you would actually be able to react better to cybersecurity threats, for example. You have a better supportability of your IT infrastructure. Just imagine if you actually do a change in your infrastructure, maybe just a router, and if you know the impact that router can bring to your organization, there would be better plan, and therefore you'll be able to reduce the impact of a potential outage on that component. Having a proactive management of your asset life cycle. For example, you can actually plan for evergreening to allow you to do budgeting better. You can plan for budget if you know exactly what would need to be done in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months, or 18 months. And therefore, when you do it like that, it would give you the proactive information to drive down your OPEX and CAPEX. Maybe you don't really need to buy new computers. Maybe you can actually be able to just leasing based upon whatever criteria criteria that you actually put into the system. And finally, having that, just imagine that everybody who are involved in that diagram on my second slide, then you will be able to achieve the operational efficiency of your IT infrastructure. So in short, with the right tools, the right processes, the right resources, the organization will actually be able to reap the benefits that I just listed above. So please allow me to introduce just very briefly who RealIT Management is. I founded the company in 1998 after a stint working at HP, and really our commitment to our customers is that we would help them to keep their IT system running with minimal downtime, and that their IT processes optimized with the streamlined workflow as well as strategic automation. Because in the end, in order to do your ITO processes, including the typical chain management, incident management requests, you will need to have a lot of automation to help out. And we do offer the solution, consulting services, support, the training, as well as additional software development on top that are related to any deployment we do. So with that, I would like to thank you so much. And if you have any questions, hopefully there are questions that are actually presented already.
Yeah, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please enter your questions onto the control panel in the question tab. And we can give that just a minute, see if any questions come through.
No questions?
No questions coming through.
I can actually see one here, Ed. It says, we have a hybrid IT environment. How do you suggest handling of both on-prem and cloud-based assets?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, most organizations are actually heading that way. They will have on-prem and in the cloud. So depends on the technology you have. I know that Micro Focus has a solution to allow it to scan information, basically scanning asset on-prem and also in the cloud. And that solution talk to the configuration management system and be able to populate your configuration management system with assets that are both on-prem and in the cloud. So it is already a solution in place to allow to achieve that. And this solution will talk to actually all of the cloud provider, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform. And if you have your internal private cloud, it also be able to peek inside that as well. Anything else?
I see another one here, Ed. It's about managing contracts. Just gonna
managing contract.
Yeah,
you're talking about what contract, software contracts or maintenance contract, or
managing maintenance contracts is a big part of our asset management process. How do you recommend handling these types of contracts?
All right, thanks so much for that question. Yeah, for sure. User or organization who are using any type of hardware or software do need to manage the maintenance contract. And if you were using the Microsoft solution, the asset management solution, there is a module in there to allow your organization to actually create maintenance contracts that are linked to the asset. So when the time to renew, you actually be able to tap into the system to know exactly when you need to renew. And in fact, the system can also be configured to generate alerts to the asset team, maybe 60 days or 30 days ahead of time, that these are the assets that need to be renewed. In addition, because the fact that it does link to the IT, the ITO processes as well on the request and also in change management. So if you do have any asset that actually decommissioned out of the original contract, it would actually be able to flag so that you would know exactly what you need to renew. And it can be used both for hardware as well as software maintenance contract. That module also handle warranty as well, so there's a wealth of information there. And if you are interested in knowing more about the solution, we'll be happy to discuss more in detail later on.
Thank you. Next question is, what are your thoughts in having a governance that includes asset owners based on asset class?
Based on asset class. This is actually directly related to what I call the soft asset or the business operational, not asset, the soft attribute or business or operational related attribute. So we have that information. If you have a governance in place, you can actually come up with a data set that are related to your operation, and then we can actually import or be able to bring that into the asset management system. So by doing so, particularly if there are review meeting for your asset class on a regular basis, we can make that available and either link that into your request management process or the change management process to allow the ITSM solution to do something with the governance information within the asset. Now, governance probably also be dealing with the compliance side of things. For example, if you are actually looking at software license management, with the software asset management module within the Micro Focus solution, you can actually be able to create reports and be able to produce a list of assets that are actually out of compliance. So that's on the software side. On the hardware side, if you have things like network devices that are not really meeting your security requirements or compliance, it would also be able to help you identify and pinpoint exactly what you need to do based upon information that are readily available by the hardware vendors that a particular solution from Micro Focus is able to tap into.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question was related to a slide that you had up in your summary. It says, you mentioned IT asset management is becoming increasingly more important for organizations of all sizes. And I think the first bullet on there was better reaction to cyber threats. Can you help us understand how managing IT assets effectively relates to reducing cyber threats?
Okay, so yeah, thank you for that question. The effectiveness of your IT asset management solution depends on the type of data that you can actually be able to bring in. So just for example, knowing what operating system and the patch level of your system, of your servers, or if you're running on the firewalls and it knows exactly what firewall patch or hotfixes are available there, it would actually be able to pull in. Now with the right technology, so for example, Micro Focus has a technology called network automation, and that network automation is able to reach out to the vendors and pull in the list of what they consider vulnerability. So when we marry the two systems, the asset that actually have the vulnerability identified by the scanning and compare the list, it would actually be able to provide you with the list of assets that are actually currently vulnerable because of the published vulnerability right there that are actually made available by the vendors of that technology you're using. It's not just something that Micro Focus is pulling in. So by doing so, we can have the consistent scanning of information and be able to cross-reference and give you the information that you need to actually be able to do. So this is right across the the board, from the hardware, from server hardware to network hardware to even application. And I know that it's not a one-size-fits-all. There would be information that are made available by maybe software vendors regarding their application. Maybe they're using a certain level of Java that would actually have some vulnerabilities right there. In the end, it really is an orchestration of data flow, like I mentioned in one of my slides. So for this reason, it is a complex system, complex enough that would require the organization to be serious about having somebody looking after your IT asset management solution almost full time in order for you to actually be able to stay on top of the type of information that would be available. I know that there are more to what I just mentioned right there, but it is a potential that you're going to be able to achieve. And I'm quite sure that there are many other vendors who are tapping into this because, for example, we are partnering up with another partner called Anomaly. And Anomaly is actually gathering up cyber threat intelligence, and they offer the intelligent information from a subscription basis. So if we can be able to tap into that subscription and sift through the information and find out that there may be certain threats that are related to a particular technology component, and then we refer back to the IT asset information that you have, and you identify, oh, I actually do have this particular vendor in our environment. That would give you a little bit better posture in terms of how to address your cybersecurity threat within your organization. It's constantly changing, so you need to keep on expanding it.
Great, thank you, Ed. Another question here with regards to how to set up your project. So it says, how do you organize IT projects to enable ongoing enhancements to the ITOM program?
It's a great question, and I think the answer is not just for ITOM. The answer is really for any particular IT project. So when you set up a project, make sure that the organization has an owner of that particular process going forward. That group of owner of the process will be the custodians of the process going forward, because really, in terms of setting up your project, phase one of a project is about implementing your foundation of the technology that you selected. You're just implementing the very first step. IT asset management is about collecting data on an ongoing basis so that you are staying basically up to staying current with your data. And data set would change. Maybe there will be new data that you need to actually pull in. So without that governance or without that process owner in place, you will end up with only having the first layer or the first foundation of a technology that you put in. And there won't be any team in place to allow you to handle enhancements. Now, having a team in place, having a process owner in place is not going to make things happen. You need to have management team agree to that and involve in the discussion of having a discussion of a budgeting. Because this IT asset management, or any solution for that matter, that you put in your organization, without constant adjustment, it will become stale, and then you will be facing the possibility of being displaced by another tool. Because if somebody come in with a stronger voice in terms of management team, then you're going to end up having the organization would lean towards just replacing with something that promise a better handling of your current requirement. Okay, so I don't know if that helps or not, but we've seen so many cases, and in fact, I've seen cases where organizations are actually ripping out a solution that was working well, but they need something a little bit better. They rip it out and they put it in a new solution, and only to find out that the new solution faces exactly the similar problem. and but because of the cost involved in replace like that, they would end up with that solution sticking in or stuck in the particular first step. I typically liken it to learning how to bike. You know, you get a bike, you take first step, you fall, or you actually fall off, and the bike doesn't have the momentum. And if you just take the first step and you don't keep at it, you're not going to be able to go to be able to ride a bike. And if you decided that, well, it's not working with this bike, I'm going to buy a new bike. Well, with a new bike, you take the first step, and I think you get my point.
Good analogy, Mr. Pham. I like that. The questions are flowing; they're coming through here, and in the interest of time, I think we'll take a couple more, and then maybe I'm going to suggest that we obviously reach out to Ed to have one-on-one conversations, because we're not going to have enough time to cover questions. So here's a question for you: is there a standard method for collecting data on hardware and software assets that are off network, i.e. compartmentalized labs, or must these assets be on the network?
Great question. What you have, and in fact, we have customers who do have assets that are actually considered off limits. So for these, the standard way to do that is actually you're going to be deploying scanners. You actually have a scanning solution. You go in and scan the asset, basically scan the asset tag, and you dock it into your asset, your scanner solution, and then you have to massage the data set. And this is why in my ecosystem under the user, I actually have data consumer and data producer. Your user would have to help you in producing the right data set for you, right? Worst case scenario, you have to actually take a manual inventory. Now, if typically these assets that are off net, they may not change very drastically. So you may have to say, well, we're going to be doing a physical inventory once every year or once every 6 months. The process that you need to put in place to do your inventory, the physical inventory, will allow you to produce this data set. So you have to come out with the form or the right matrix to allow your team to be able to scan the inventory, and then you populate that. It may be just populate and put it into a spreadsheet, and then you load that spreadsheet into your system once every now and then. 3 months, 6 months, a year, based on whatever your criteria would be. But the effort involved in getting these non-discoverable attributes, I'm not kidding you, it's very challenging, and this is why most organizations would give up on it, because it's taxing. But if you actually work it into your operational procedure, perhaps once a year during this low period, we're going to be doing an inventory, a physical inventory. And spreadsheet is a great way to get data into your IT asset management system.
All right, excellent.
Okay.
Ed, in the interest of time, I think we should maybe just let the audience and the attendees know, how to get a hold of you, and how you might be able to help them address their challenges and set up an effective IT management.
Perfect. So I have my contact information on screen right now. So if you send me an email with your questions, and if you would like for us to actually engage in this 1 hour initial conversation, please reach out to me, and we will coordinate that and get back to you in terms of when we're going to be able to meet. If you reach out to me, please also include your objective, your current challenges that you're having, perhaps the system that you're currently using to handle IT asset management. I do confess that we are a channel partner with Micro Focus, so anything related to HP or Micro Focus software, we have very deep knowledge. If you're using other solutions, then we would actually be able to produce or provide some input right there. Now, mind you, that technology only makes up about 10 to 20% of what you need to do in order to have your effective IT asset management solution in place. Okay, so with that, thanks again. It's great having you on board, and I look forward to seeing information or question coming from the audience directly to my inbox.
Excellent. Katie, do you want to take us home?
Jess, I'd just like to thank you, Edward, for doing the presentation today, and would like to remind everyone that you can download a copy of the presentation from your handout tab, and you will also receive a replay link to this webinar within 24 hours. So with that, I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Bye now.